Alright, what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Tristan. Most of you know me as Taze. This is the Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, and we are joined by a truly special guest, someone who's a Forbes 30 under 30, the former president of Infinite Esports Entertainment, and I believe the owner of the Sports Symposium as well, correct?
Yes, I started a company called the Ivy Sports Symposium now, dating back 2006. We haven't done the event in a while, but we had a really nice 10-year run.
Wonderful. And for those that aren't aware of who this is Chris Chaney, someone who obviously has a growing amount of experience in the esports space. So kind of tell the podcast a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into business and so forth.
I'd be happy to. First off, thanks for having me, Tristan. I'm looking forward to a good and fun show. I got interested in the business of sports during my years in college. I was working at the time with our men's basketball team and also running an on-campus basketball tournament. I was really immersed in the world of basketball and intrigued by what's going on behind the scenes on the one side of a team, which is somewhat similar to even a professional sports team in terms of coaches and managers and staff and travel and tournaments and being on TV and things like that. And but also had the experience or had the opportunity to get the experience on the event management side, so actually running a project from idea to inception, and those two things really got me excited and set me on a path to have a career in the sports industry. And I ended up working for the National Basketball Association, the NBA, after college, and was based in New York, which is the NBA's which is where the NBA's corporate offices are located, and that was really the I guess at that time already the continuation of my journey that started in college and then on to the NBA. And I decided to start my own company. I very quickly realized that my ambition is to be an entrepreneur, and so I left and actually haven't looked back since. I started a sports marketing and consulting agency and spent a lot of time in what I would call non-traditional or emerging sports and entertainment, whether that's action sports, mixed martial arts, rugby, obstacle course racing, um, really verticals within sports and entertainment that have seen, in some cases, explosive growth in the last few years. And that is what ultimately led me to esports.
So how did you get into esports? Because from my perspective, I first heard of you when you started working with Tatum Mines, who's an Australian organization, and then I knew you were also doing some advisory roles for a couple of different organizations.
Well, I first got into the space in 2016, early 2016. I was wrapping up another project, and I was starting to look around and actually got really excited when I came across esports. I felt that it had some similarities to both the traditional sports space as well as the non-traditional sports space, and I quickly started reaching out to folks, particularly on LinkedIn, which I think is an amazing tool,
Yeah.
and had conversations, reached out to people, and simply asked them for a few minutes of their time to give me an opportunity to learn about esports. And one conversation, as they say, led to the next, and before I knew it, I was deeply immersed in the space, and I grew a passion for the business of esports and the people in it. And I decided I wanted to build an esports business, an esports platform. And in 2016, mid 2016, laid the foundation for what was ultimately going to be Infinite Esports. And along the way, as you mentioned, I had an opportunity to experience esports at an international level. I got involved with an organization called Team of Minds, and also started just getting more exposure to esports, and getting connected with some other entrepreneurs in the space, and really along the lines of continuously learning. And back then I was very new, and for me the number one goal is, let's learn about esports and then figure out what I could build in the space.
Yeah, definitely. So, talk about, I guess, as much as you can, without going into, private things. How did the concept for Infinite start? Because I've heard that, it was a combination of ideas you came up with, a combination of stuff that Hector Rodriguez came up with, and a couple of different things. So kind of talk about how Infinite kind of started out.
As I mentioned, really the foundation for Infinite was laid in mid 2016, when I started to really get to know the space, and had a number of conversations, many conversations with people that were already in esports. And one of the things that I wanted to do was build a business that would have really, really deep roots in Texas, where it's just where I'm based, not from, but where I'm based, and particularly in the Dallas area, which is one of the fastest growing markets in the country, and I later found out was arguably the home of the early days of esports. And so it was, for me, it made sense given the growth of the space, and then again finding out that esports or Dallas was home to esports at one point in North America, or one of the homes of esports many years ago now. And I wanted to build a business here, and I wanted to build a business that would both own and have team assets, or would own teams, professional esports teams, and at the same time would also be almost a venture builder, where we would build other companies, related companies in the space, non-teams. So that was the beginning, and I linked up with some fellow local entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurially minded individuals here, and we laid a small group of people, and we laid the foundation again in 2016 for Infinite. Really great people. It was a group of 6 basically, and we started the Infinite process. Ultimately, we launched the business in September 2017. Along that journey, we added more people to the team. We got introduced to Hector at OpTic Gaming, and he was already looking for a new home for OpTic, and was very interested in Texas, and he has personal connections here, and we kind of hit it off relatively quickly, and then it took a while for us to get something done, to work out an agreement, and then we were able to pull that off in September of 2017, but really the foundation was laid in mid 2016, and then it took us a solid year to, as I'd call it, put all the pieces together.
Okay. I mean, it's kind of nice to see the journey OpTic has taken, minus the last couple of months, because of obviously the acquisition to what is now IGC, and some other things in the space. So when it came down to it, I know immediately you guys came out of the gate with Infinite, not only acquiring OpTic, but you guys acquired Sector 6, which I've talked to Zach. I've done business with him in the past, from an organization standpoint. But also you guys launched Esports Stadium Arlington, which is still around. I believe it's the largest event facility for esports in the country, which is kind of crazy. And then you guys launched some other projects. So kind of talk about like everything Infinite did for maybe those that don't necessarily know what Infinite was.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, there are really two sides to our business. On the one side, we owned and operated a few professional esports organizations. Obviously, Optic Gaming being the tentpole, crown jewel, if you will. That's where we spend a tremendous amount of resources and a tremendous amount of focus. Then with Optic, we were also able to secure a slot in the, at the time, NALCS, now just LCS,
Yeah.
so North America's premier League of Legends competition. And then separately, we secured a franchise in the Overwatch League, which came to be known as the Houston Outlaws, and actually ended up being, at least from a brand perspective, the most successful team in season one of the Overwatch League, or one of the most successful teams in season one of the Overwatch League. And then we also added a couple of smaller, younger organizations that we felt had some growth potential, specifically Obey Alliance and Allegiance. Allegiance, for example, was positioned as a family-friendly and mobile esports, mobile gaming focused organization. And mobile esports are still relatively small here in the West,
Yes.
but already tremendously popular in Asia, China, Southeast Asia. And so we thought it was an investment in the future, which I do think in the West will also include mobile. So we had the team side. That was one part of our business. And then on the other side, we launched a few companies. Again, we were, call it a venture builder. And a couple of those companies may be worth mentioning. One, we had an esports academy, which was meant to develop the next generation of players. And because it seems like in esports today, there's really no defined path to becoming a pro, and lots of luck. I mean, it's always luck,
Yeah.
even if there's path, but the path currently is very undefined, and so we wanted to provide that path to aspiring professional gamers. And we started with Call of Duty. We did League of Legends, and we had plans to expand into some other games. And that was, for us, really exciting because it's an opportunity to contribute to the growth of individuals as well as the growth of the space, because player development is incredibly important. As the industry continues to grow, and I think as you want to achieve, the highest level of performance, and I think we're still ways from that to achieving across games that highest level of performance. So that was one of our initiatives, an esports academy. We also created a content studio, a content company, which produced basically all of our YouTube and social media content across our brands. We had some fantastic, some really, really great producers there, super smart and really passionate. And we also, for example, had a sponsorship sales arm, which sold across our companies sponsorships, whether it's a Turtle Beach, Nissan, Mountain Dew, or specifically Game Fuel. It was our sponsorship sales arm, in-house sponsorship sales, and with the opportunity to, of course, work across esports long term, as well as teams and even events and leagues are looking for sponsors, constantly looking for sponsors. We thought we could do a great job internally and then ultimately offer our services to the market as far as sponsorship sales is concerned. So those are three things that we did. We did a couple others, but those three are maybe the ones I'd highlight. Esports Academy, meaning talent development, then content studio, so video content for social, YouTube, etc., and then sponsorship sales as our in-house partnerships or sponsorships arm.
Okay. Yeah, and I remember the beginning of GGEA very well because I hadn't gone to a World War II event besides the Call of Duty event for Anaheim. I always try to make it out there every year. But I always remember watching GGEA growing in the space, as well as watching a lot of the content that NoScope ended up creating and so forth. In terms of things, I know people have always, from the outside, put a very negative connotation on Infinite. From your perspective, was it challenging to run Infinite and all these brands, knowing that there was a lot of pressure coming from the respective fan bases of those organizations? And you know, like, how did you guys deal with, you know, the mixing of cultures? Because obviously there's corporate cultures, and then there's, you know, like, each organization has their own culture where, you know, teams like Obey Alliance was built in content and Call of Duty, and, you know, we've talked in the past that the Call of Duty community is very aggressive yet passionate. Like, how did you deal with those culture shocks when it came through?
Definitely one of the challenges, as you mentioned, whenever you combine different cultures and you look to put them sort of under one hat, or at least reconcile them, it's always going to be challenging, no question. I think we showed across the board that we had a lot of commitment to our brands, and we invested a lot in our brands. So we were always juggling priorities and internal resources between the different companies, and that's the challenge in any startup, whether you do one thing or five things, whether you have 10 people or 200 people. It's just, you know, it's just each startup is just a little different, but ultimately you prioritize and you reprioritize, and you stay sharp, you know, on a daily basis. But I think sometimes in esports you probably have to block out the noise on the outside, because there's always someone going to be critical of you. If you win, you don't win enough. If you don't win, then you're bad, and
Yeah.
and I think it's never easy to please everyone.
Yeah.
First off, it's never easy. Now, when you make mistakes, those mistakes can certainly be magnified, and you can be put under a microscope. Sometimes unfairly so, sometimes fairly so, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's fair and criticism is warranted, and sometimes criticism might not be warranted. But I would say it's always difficult to look at an organization from the outside without really understanding and being there to know all the things that are actually going on, all the nuances that are actually going on. And that's where I'd say sometimes we're easy, or it's quick to sort of jump to conclusions, right? And maybe point the finger at one or another person or group, and that's your reality. But not having all the information, I think, makes that really challenging. But I'd say we had both successes and failures when it came to the integration of culture. But we worked very hard to make to sort of consolidate and make things work. But yes, I mean, people on the outside, they see what they see, or they don't see what they don't see, and they form an opinion based on that, and that's sometimes, I think, difficult, or maybe unfair. But you know, we're in the space to win it.
Yeah.
We're not in the space just to be there. We're in the space to win. So any and all criticism, to me, is okay. You know, criticism is okay, and we're certainly we're putting we're putting ourselves out there, and hopefully we'll succeed, and if we fail, then we'll sort of rejig and make some adjustments and keep going at it, and right, you fail and you fail again, but you keep going. So definitely challenges around cultural integration, but I think everyone was very passionate about making things work and working very hard towards that. And you always, in my mind, have a quote unquote target on your back, especially in a space that has this much attention and this much passion, especially if you're just talking about Call of Duty.
Yeah. And that was the reason I kind of asked about the question, because I know a lot of people point fingers. In the beginning, I know the finger got pointed at you or other people inside of Infinite. A couple times fairly by myself, and of course I've apologized at length for those times, now knowing a little bit more as things have come out over time. And that's also why I feel that question is important for the community to kind of get insight on, because again, a lot of people don't necessarily know a lot when it comes down to things. We think we know, we think we have an idea, or people go on a storm on social media and say things, but unless you really get to understand certain things from a business and a personal perspective, it can be very difficult to really understand, I think, the process when it comes down to it. Moving into... oh, go ahead.
And one more note on that, Tristan. I think because we live in such public times, meaning there's through social media in particular, things always get magnified, both good and bad. Things get magnified, and to me, I'm okay with that. By the way, I'm okay with that. That's the industry that we're in as it relates to esports, so that's fine. I think what sometimes happens, though, and that's just not in esports, but you really see it in almost any industry, is that sometimes the loudest voices get the most attention, and I think maybe that's indicative of the times that we live in. But I think if you're on the outside, you hear and perhaps listen to the loudest voice. And the loudest voice doesn't have to be right, doesn't have to be wrong. It's just the voice that's out there, and it's what you hear. And then if you don't have another voice that may give you another perspective, then that becomes reality for you, or that becomes truth to you. And I think that's just, again, to the point that I made before, I think that's just a little difficult to have that loudest voice, or to have that one voice, when it's never just that. It's like when you get into an argument with a friend and you both point your fingers at each other, and you both have your sides as far as right and who's wrong. And if you're an outsider and you just hear one of the friend's sides, well, then that becomes what you probably think is real. And so that's the one thing where I feel like it's important to just be a bit careful, that it's not about who's right or wrong, but at times maybe just hearing that loudest voice, and that's it.
Yeah. So obviously Infinite did have its struggles. And of course, in November of last year, you guys went through kind of I would say a consolidation, or really kind of slowing things down. And I know, I think you've talked about it, and I know a certain individual as well that the Call of Duty industry kind of hates, so I won't mention him by name. Kind of talked about Infinite grew too fast. Do you believe that it grew too fast? And looking back on that chapter, of you getting into esports and business, do you think that there are things you could have done better, if you were given, a second chance, maybe to test, what Infinite was again. Once, maybe I would say if, people with the right knowledge or right future-minded growth of the industry are put into place.
Well, those are two big questions, and I'll start with the second one. Absolutely. I think anyone that looks back and says they do exactly the same things over, even if you succeed, I don't believe that. I believe you always look back daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and think about what you could have done differently. If you finish second at the Olympics, you'll look back and you won't say, I'm happy with second place. You'll think and about how do you become, what should you have done differently to win gold?
Yeah.
So I think you always have to have that retrospective in my mind where you look back and you think about what could have. You don't beat yourself up over it.
Yeah.
To me, that's a mistake. But you look back and you think about what you could have done differently, and then you take that forward versus living or staying or being stuck in the past, right? You analyze that, you think about it, and then you take that analysis and those learnings, hopefully, and you take those forward. So that's I think that I think is really important. So to answer the question, absolutely, I go back and I think about we could have done 100 things. I could have done 100 things differently, and we've made plenty of mistakes. Some of which I attribute to startup mistakes, and some were just simply mistakes. But that's also to me just business. You put yourself out there to fail, and sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. But you put yourself out there, and you're naturally making mistakes. There's no blueprint in my mind when it comes to esports. I don't think that exists today. It's not like you can go back 50 years and say, okay, how has this industry tracked over the last 50 years, and what are the growth patterns, and what businesses have done well and what businesses haven't done well, and stuff like that. I don't think there's a playbook. I feel like we're developing the playbook as we speak. So yes, would have changed many different things, lots of things. But fundamentally, to come to the first question, I believed and I still believe in the approach that we had. I do think that building a platform was and is the right approach. Because the businesses can, if executed properly, feed each other and build off each other, and I firmly believe in that, which is why we did it, and you have to have that belief. So I would do it again, make some adjustments, make some changes to it, but I would do it again. And I feel that we were successful, or that we had successes. Sure, in hindsight, you think, well, this didn't go well, and that didn't go well, and what have you. But I think if you take stock across the board, I thought we were successful, and I thought we actually had some incredibly talented people in the company. I've mentioned this before, but I would put the team that we had up against any team in esports. And I say that with a lot of pride, because I just feel so fortunate about the people that we've had involved.
Yeah.
We do it again, and I think we I don't know if I would say we grew too fast. I don't think that, because that was the plan that we had. I think if we had, if we had pursued on our course for 12 more months, and then maybe taken stock at that point and made some adjustments, that's great. I think you constantly do that. But that concept of, we grew too fast and stuff like that, I don't I don't believe that. I think you go out there as a venture builder that we were, you run at it hard, you bring in the right people, you make some mistakes, but you keep on moving and keep on learning. And so I don't, changes, yes, adjustments, yes, but sort of this big thing of saying, oh, this wasn't good and we need to, no, I don't prescribe to that.
Yeah. I definitely believe Infinite truly had good intentions. I actually wrote a blog very shortly before the Immortals acquisition that the model you guys were creating is good and sustainable over time. And I detailed, again, going back to each one of the companies that you guys kind of had, where each one had its own successes from the beginnings, whether it was pre-Infinite or during Infinite, and have even gone on to kind of, I wouldn't say eclipse, because I think that would be the wrong word, but to kind of grow into what I think it was each was supposed to be. Sector 6 being acquired by a brand that is now on the Walmart marketplace. You see Esports Arlington hosting ton of crazy events. I'm going to try to go to the Esports Award. I think it's the week before Thanksgiving when I'm in Texas, and I'm like, that's a little unfortunate, but still try to make the journey out there. And I think it's really interesting, the whole chapter of Infinite. From your perspective, once you left Infinite and to now what's happened with brands like OpTic or Obey or some of the other Infinite companies, what do you think? Because I know a lot of people from certain teams and their fan bases think that it's going to be the end for this fan base or the end for this organization. We obviously saw Allegiance close down last year. Rest in peace to them and everything. We've seen Obey Alliance kind of have a resurgence, which I'm happy. My roots are centered in YouTube and content, so I remember growing up and watching OpTic and FaZe and Obey and some of the other teams that are transitioning from YouTube to esports. So it's nice to see they're around, but obviously the OpTic situation still leaves a sour taste in everybody's mouth. What is your perspective on that?
That's another big and not a big question, and there I don't think there is an easy answer. First off, I do feel that many of the people that were part of Infinite, and I guess rest in peace, Infinite, are doing great things, and maybe Infinite has helped, but it's because they're great people and because they deserve to be successful because they've put in the work, and I'm happy for them, really happy to see the people that we had in our organization continue to thrive in the space. Again, I think we've had some of the most talented people in esports, and if you see where they've gone on to now, then maybe that comment isn't too inaccurate from my side. But yeah, I think when the sale happened, obviously from a fan's perspective, it's tough because there've basically been these four or so transition points. One OpTic being sold in September 2000 or in end of summer 2017. Then some of the early challenges in 2018, called it Q1 of 2018. Then changes end of last year, and now even more potential or more angst with the sale. So I think for the fans, it's been super hard because it feels like things have been unstable and it's been a roller coaster ride, and that's really unfortunate. Actually, I'm really sad about that because because it's not a good situation to be in, or a fan's perspective to not know what does the future hold for your, for the organization you so passionately follow.
Yeah.
In terms of the future and kind of what comes next, I mean, Immortals has put together, or IGC has put together, a really, I think, formidable, list of assets, list of teams. Gamers Club, MIBR as a brand is
Yeah.
strong. Immortals, the brand, which will be back in the LCS next year.
Yeah.
You have LA Valiant, one of two teams in LA in the Overwatch League, and now you have Optic Gaming. I think there'll be some challenges around reconciling culture, the same or similar challenges that we had. I think Optic focusing on Call of Duty probably makes sense. I mean, it's not obviously my decision,
Yeah.
but exclusively being active in or being present in Call of Duty probably brings the brand to its core, back to its core, even if that might be limiting at the same time that you can only do Call of Duty moving forward.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that IGC will do a great job with the Optic brand. I'm hopeful that the fans can find some solace in the fact that they have an amazing ownership group behind Immortals, and I think they want the Optic brand to succeed long term. And they'll put hopefully the resources, both people and capital, behind that to allow Optic to thrive as part of IGC. So I'm hopeful. I'm not part of it, but I'm hopeful, and I'm certainly rooting for Optic as a brand to be super successful, and even now under new ownership.
Yeah. And that's something I was always questionable about, because I knew that Immortals had taken an ownership twist at the beginning, or sorry, not at the beginning of the year, but at the end of last year, almost. And a lot of different changes happened, and then of course, one of the biggest issues was figuring out what's going to happen with Optic. I think from the perspective of keeping the Optic name as a franchise, similar to how Houston Outlaws was only a franchise in the Overwatch League, is a good idea from a brand perspective, because I think then the Optic name carries on as long as the Call of Duty League succeeds, and I hope it does. Because franchise leagues have really had a rough time the last couple years, really proving growth and so forth in the space. And it's kind of also interesting to hear your perspective from looking in as a fan of Optic or these other brands, or as a industry professional, about what's happening with the IGC and Optic situation. I personally give them all the support, unless they make a bad decision here or there. I'll criticize the bad. I'll love the good ones. But that's just how I am, also as an owner of an organization in the space, and understanding I took 7 years to scratch and claw, whereas it's not as easy to do that these days. So kind of talk a little bit about the future for you. What's going on? Like, what are you up to in the business and landscape areas? Any advice that you really have for people who maybe want to get into esports, maybe want to start a business, things of that nature.
Happy to. And just one more note on the Optic piece. I mean, I think everyone should root for Optic to succeed.
Yes.
It's a great brand. There's so much history. There's obviously a tremendous amount of passion. I think it'd be a mistake not to root for Optic's continued success. So I'm hopeful that people can take that perspective, whether you're friend or foe, that you want Optic to succeed. And yeah, it's been a difficult journey, I think, for the Optic fans in the last year and a half, going on, I guess, 2 years. But I think there's a way forward. I'm certainly rooting for IGC to be successful, and because I think that's good for the industry, for IGC to be successful. To me, that's good for everyone, and that includes Optic being successful, hopefully super successful as well. Well, as for me, I've been spending a lot of time working with some startups across the industry, which has been really great. Early stage startups where I'm acting as an advisor, working with them on fundraising, overall strategy, and being a sounding board to the CEOs, and the founding teams that are building these businesses, and providing a lot of feedback and thoughts, and also connecting them with folks that I know within the space, and so that's been great. I've enjoyed that a lot, because in a way I know what it's like to be out there grinding as an entrepreneur, and then on the other side, it's an opportunity for me to also see a lot of different aspects of the industry. So most of these are non-teams, but they're startups that tackle everything from data and analytics to player development, to smart contracts. I mean, it's an array of things. That to me has been fun. And then on top of that, I've been working on a few new, been brainstorming around a few new concepts or ideas in the space, and I think we'll get ready. I'll get ready to potentially launch something here in the fall.
I mean, wonderful. And I wish you the best of luck. As a person who has got to know you a little bit more, and has respected you over the years. I do wish you the best of luck. I hope that fans of, if there were fans of Infinite, if there's still fans of respective organizations or companies that I think have Infinite in their good graces, I hope that they wish you the best of luck. And then again, to touch on the final thing, is what advice do you have for people trying to get into the scene, trying to build an organization, maybe build a company or multiple companies, obviously from your perspective? And then do you think that traditional sports and esports can coexist in a way that's successful?
To answer the second question, absolutely. Absolutely. They can coexist, and they can coexist, not just coexist, but they can thrive together. Esports and sports, those are not in any way mutually exclusive. And in my mind, they go hand in hand. They're different, very important. They're different. But I do think that they belong together. They're part of the same broader entertainment ecosystem. And so, yes, they can not just coexist, they can thrive together. As far as advice, I mean, I think you want to know the business of esports, and that means reading up on what's happening in the industry, staying really informed, understanding some of the trends and some of the data around the space, domestically in the US as well as internationally. I do think it's important to have a good grasp also on the industry globally. You want to know some of the things that are going on, and I'm not talking about Reddit necessarily, but
Yeah.
I'm talking about Esports Insider, the Esports Observer. Even on the traditional sports side, you want to maybe read publications such as Front Office Sports and Sports Pro Media and Sports Business Journal. I mean, if you're interested in the business of esports, I think you also have to then create some separation between one's own fandom and sort of being that fan, and then being in the business. If you're in the business, then you obviously can still be a fan.
Yeah.
but you have to be sharp on the business side. I don't think you'll get a job in esports just because you're a fan, or you'll be successful in esports because you're a fan. There are lots of fans, millions and millions of fans, but you need to be good on the business side. So I'd say lots of reading, lots of education, networking, getting to know people in the space, whether your networking tool is Twitter, or it's LinkedIn, any other platform, going to esports business conferences, getting to know people there, listening to podcasts and attending those panel sessions at events, and then figuring out where you want to fit in the space, and what gets you excited. And then you pursue that. You pursue that. You volunteer. You put yourself out there. You scratch and claw, and with some luck, and you'll be able to get that opportunity, whether it's starting your own org, or working with another, or just a company in the space. Lots of perseverance, lots of education, and some solid strategic networking.
Well, yeah, definitely. Again, thank you so much, Chris, for finally taking the time to do the podcast and everything. I know a lot of the fans of the podcast will appreciate it. Certainly myself, I really do, because I think you're the first actual industry professional that we've brought onto the podcast. We've had some entertainers and some people I've known in the industry for a very long time. But of course, it was wonderful to have you on the podcast.
It was a pleasure, Tristan. Thank you for having me.
And for anyone who is watching the podcast on YouTube or listening to it on iTunes and Spotify, once Apple and Spotify get us set up and everything, please make sure to share the podcast with a lot of your friends. It'd be really appreciated. I think that this podcast is going to go a lot of places in terms of things, and hopefully for those that love gaming, esports, entertainment, things of that nature, that a lot of you guys are really going to enjoy this podcast. So with that being said, my name's Tristan. Most of you know me as Taze, and I will see all of you guys in the next episode.